Laxia von Roswell was a proper lady, thank you very much. And a proper lady had to maintain her bearings in every situation, even when shipwrecked on a deserted island. After washing up on the beach, she'd spent what felt like hours rushing around in a vain search for other survivors. Now, she felt absolutely exhausted. Her salt-encrusted clothes creaked with sand, chafing in the most uncomfortable places. She needed to wash it all off if she wanted to restore her ability to think straight. Last night on the Lombardia, Franz had infuriated her so much by showing up out of the blue. Being her butler didn't give him any right to follow her everywhere. She probably shouldn't have said all these things to him before storming out of the saloon, but she fully expected to straighten them out in the morning, as well as to give him a proper scolding for disobedience. And now she didn't even know what had happened to him. She refused to entertain the idea that he hadn't made it ashore, but given that, so far, she hadn't found any trace of survivors, she had to at least acknowledge the possibility. The thought brought tears to her eyes, even though crying was absolutely unseemly for a proper lady. She supposed she should feel grateful that leaving the party early and being in her stateroom when the disaster struck had allowed her to change out of that ridiculous dress into a comfortable pair of breeches and shirt, strap on her rapier and belt pouch, and grab a few necessities, such as a scarf and a life vest. This had made her as prepared as possible when she rushed on deck and into all the chaos. She would never forget the screams, the breaking masts, people falling overboard. What a horror! And now she was alone, possibly the only survivor, with no idea what to do. Tears welled in her eyes again, and she vigorously wiped them away. First things first, a bath. She found a clean stream and followed it to a secluded glade where a big boulder at its bend marked a wider pond she could use to wash properly. Glancing around to ensure that no predators would disturb her at a vulnerable moment, she unsheathed her rapier and set it within easy reach, then quickly took off her clothes, rinsed them, and spread them over the boulder to dry before stepping into the water. It felt so good to wash off the crust of sand and sea salt, the cool water soothing her parched skin. She always got sunburned easily, and of course she'd left her creams and ointments on the Lombardia, but that was something to worry about later. She knelt, plunging her whole head beneath the water. Then, standing knee-deep in the pool and lifting her face to the sun, she wrapped into her scarf to dry off. Rocks clattered behind her. A predator? A wild beast? She grabbed her rapier and spun around. A man emerged from behind the boulder. His eyes widened when he saw the rapier pointed at him. His arm blurred as he drew his sword and knocked it out of her hand in a fluid move too fast for her to follow. Shocked, she stumbled backwards, releasing the scarf she was using for cover. It slid down into the water, leaving her stark naked. The stranger's eyes grew wider still. His cheeks flared scarlet, and the jagged tip of the rusty sword in his hand, how had he managed to draw it so quickly, dipped to the ground? She screamed, then grabbed her clothes and sprinted for the nearby bushes. She recognized the man, that insolent crewman from last night, who had interrupted her so rudely on the way to her cabin. A swirl of emotion swept through her head. Relief at seeing another survivor of the shipwreck. Annoyance about their previous meeting, when he'd talked to her like an equal and showed much more perception and insight than a simple crewman like him had any right to do. Disappointment that this wasn't Franz. Deep in the leafy thicket, she hastily pulled on her damp clothing, unsure what to do. Should she keep running? Probably a sensible course of action, considering she didn't know this man at all. But then again, a villain trying to take advantage of her probably wouldn't look so terrified or blush so deeply after catching her at an inappropriate moment. At present, the two of them seemed to be the only survivors from the Lombardia. It seemed like a better idea to stay together. She supposed, worries aside, she should be thankful that it wasn't Franz who discovered her. She would never live down the shame of being seen naked by her own butler. Still, facing that arrogant man was hardly any better. Last night he had acted so boldly around her, as if he considered himself to be superior. And now, why did men have to be so disgusting, tactless, domineering, ogling every woman they came across? A lady was entitled to privacy when taking a bath. She clung to her anger as she finished dressing. Without the anger, she'd probably burst into tears. With a witness this time, which would be completely unforgivable. Anger helped her to hold it together as she finally allowed herself to face the full extent of her predicament. Shipwrecked and stuck alone with an arrogant stranger on a deserted island notorious for being cursed. When she finally emerged from the bushes, the man was standing a few feet away, his back decisively turned. She carefully checked her clothes and hair before approaching him. "I suppose I have kept you waiting long enough," she said. "You may turn around now." He kept his eyes down as he obeyed. His cheeks were still red. Good. At least he'd learned a lesson. In fact, he looked so embarrassed she almost felt sorry for him, even though she was still reeling from the memory of the incident. Last night in the dark hallway, she hadn't had a chance to see him clearly. Now that she did, the first detail that caught her eye was his distinct hair color. Flaming red, gleaming in the sun like fire. She'd never seen anyone with hair this red before. He looked younger than she'd originally thought. 3 or 4 years older than herself at most. She was good at telling people's age by small signs, like their skin, which always accumulated wrinkles and blemishes over time. This stranger's skin was surprisingly smooth, but his hands, calloused from manual work, betrayed experience. Tall and well-muscled, but not overly so, he held himself with the grace that brought to mind the renowned fencing teacher her father had once invited to Roswell Manor all the way from Rom. She'd already witnessed the ease with which this stranger had disarmed her, a nearly impossible move when wielding a heavy broadsword one-handed against a rapier. How had a swordsman of his skill ended up as a simple crewman on the Lombardia? "We should introduce ourselves," she said. "I am Laxia von Roswell, a noble lady from Garmin. And you are a sailor, I presume?" She drew herself up, looking at him down her nose. Not an easy feat considering their height difference. He finally raised his eyes, their clear blue a vibrant contrast with the red of his hair. "I'm Adel Kristen, an adventurer, actually."